Welcome to the Academy of General Dentistry podcast series featuring Dr. George Schmidt. Each episode features experts in the field of dentistry who share insights and inspiration to help you succeed. Let's get started.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. We had a great show for you today as we're going to talk digital dentures with Dr. Brian Goodacre. Brian, how are you?
Doing well. How are you doing, George?
I'm doing fantastic. So great to have you on the show. Brian Goodacre, DDS MSD, is a board-certified prosthodontist and the director of clinical technologies for Nobel Biocare North America. He is an adjunct professor at Loma Linda University School of Dentistry, providing lectures to both dental and graduate students. Goodacre lectures both nationally and internationally on topics related to digital dentistry, prosthodontics, and implant dentistry. Additionally, he has published over 20 articles in peer-reviewed journals and contributed to 6 textbook chapters. He maintains a private practice located in Upland, California, where he practices with his father, Dr. Charles J. Goodacre, and his classmate, Dr. Raj Swamidas. Well, really great to have you on the program. And you're also going to be with us at AGD 2025 this coming July 9th through 12 in Montreal. So we're looking forward to having you out there and chatting with you. And you've got a couple of great courses there. We've got some other great speakers. So in all of our listeners, we certainly encourage you to block that date out and join us there. But that's really good stuff. So, Brian, we're going to talk about digital dentures. And when we think about dentures, at least when I think about dentures, it's not always associated with, the sexiest of procedures, right? But still more than 40, I think over 40 million Americans still wear dentures. There's a big market out there for that, including about half or more than half of our seniors. And anyone that has fabricated a denture for patients knows some of the challenges full well. And anything that makes this easier or more seamless, I think is really going to be welcome. So having said that, what do you think are some of the biggest advantages or benefits of a digital denture?
Yeah, no, it's such a great thing, and really, it's good to be here with everyone, and I look forward to seeing you guys in Montreal. Digital dentures is something that it's like you said. Traditionally, when we think digital technology, the first things we think of are chairside milling and intraoral scanning and things like that. And dentures traditionally, especially removable prosthetics, don't really come into that discussion very commonly. It's kind of the last one maybe that we think that it applies to. But for me, the benefits it comes down to are you really have an ability to really streamline the workflow. So there's so many benefits, but to me, the biggest one is the workflow. When I was taught to make a denture in dental school, it was 5 appointments. And I literally had no idea what I was doing, except for I had to look at a manual that I had from my lectures and be like, okay, here's what I do appointment 1, here's what I do appointment 2, and you kind of get lost in it. And so finding ways that you still keep all those principles, but you can do it in fewer appointments is really beneficial, because obviously for us, chair time is so critical. So if we can be more efficient, but still get all the details that we need, that's such a huge benefit, I think. And then from there, you have all the other benefits that go along with the materials, whether you're milling them or printing them, you have a lot of flexibility there in terms of materials. And you have this digital file that if you ever lose a denture, hey, you can make a new one because you've got that stored. And that's actually saved me multiple times where either a pet gets a hold of a denture and destroys it, somebody drops it and breaks it, and it's been nice to be able to basically hit a button and a new one's made. And maybe you have to reline it, but you're not starting from zero. So it's pretty amazing what you can do.
No question about that. And I want to talk to you about the workflow, because I want you to walk us through that in a few minutes. But I mean, there's a lot of benefits to the patient as well, right? Because a lot of people can't tolerate impression material like gagging and all that. We all know that from prosthetics. And of course, I've been a big digital dentistry guy for a long time, but not digital dentures. I mean, I've done a lot of CAD CAM, restorations, things like that, but I never kind of crossed that bridge over into that. So talk to me then about the workflow. In other words, do you still need an impression to start out with this, or how do you walk me through it?
Yeah, so it gives you the flexibility to find what works for you in your comfort zone. And so, for me, I started out doing a conventional impression, digitizing that by scanning it, and then making a denture. Then I went to more, let's intraorally scan the soft tissue, did that for a while, and now I've actually come full circle and come back to some type of an impression. And the reason for that is just that as you do these different techniques, you kind of see the pros and cons to them, and then you kind of adapt what works for you. So for me, the workflow I do currently is I will take a patient's existing denture, and this is most commonly how I do it if the patient comes in with a denture, which majority do. Now, they may not be good examples, but they come in with something. And so that to me starts out as my custom tray. And so I will actually do basically, depending on how far the denture border is from where it should be, I will either border mold or I'll just do a wash impression as if I was doing a reline of a traditional denture. Then I scan that, not only the tissue side or the intaglio, but also the cameo surface, so the tooth side. And that allows me then digitally to, digitize the record, but also articulate it with the opposing either denture or natural teeth. And so that's that first appointment. You still select your denture teeth, you still select shade, all of these things that we're used to, but being able to use that denture, scan it, and then peel the impression material out and give it back to the patient right after you're done and they go home means I don't have to make diagnostic impressions, make a custom tray. I can skip those steps and use that denture as the custom tray. So it really helps at least streamline that first appointment, and really takes what would be 2 appointments and turns it into 1.
Yeah, that's a big savings right there. Let me just ask you a couple of questions as we go
Please.
along here.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
absolutely.
yeah, so absolutely that saves a lot of time, especially, trying to get a custom tray and all that kind of stuff. So what you're saying here, and you may address this as we go
Yeah,
along with the workflow, but 2 questions I have. So bite relation, you're not trying to take any kind of it's all digital.
yeah,
The way you do your bite relation there. And then what about some of the challenges in capture? Let's say somebody wants to try to scan the arch and they're not going to
yeah,
go ahead and do that. What
absolutely.
are what are some of the absolute things you must have,
Yeah,
and what are some of the challenges you think folks from your experience have had over the
yeah.
years?
Yeah, so when you intraorally scan, the biggest thing is all intraoral scanners have to scan something that's static, not moving, right? So as soon as something moves, the scanner is going to struggle at aligning everything. So that means you have to make sure the patient has attached keratinized tissue that's going to stay put. And so the maxilla, pretty easy, because you've got the palate to help you. So the only area you struggle in the maxilla is the denture border. So from, basically buccal flange all the way around the arch. The mandible, we start getting into a completely different discussion, because now the cheek moves, the tongue moves, and depending on how much of an edentulous ridge remains, there may not be a lot of anatomy, especially not a lot that's fixed to the bone, and therefore that's where you start to struggle. So what I find is the maxilla I can traditionally capture no problem. The mandible is where it's hit or miss, and that's just strictly from one patient to the next. You're going to have some struggles, and so that's where taking the denture and going that route with a wash impression or something like that, I can do that every time, whereas I can't always scan. So that's the struggle that I think you find, not to mention that there are so many different intraoral scanners that are available. Some are better than others at doing that. And so there's the other variable. It's a patient factor, it's a scanner factor, and then whoever's actually scanning is the next part. And they've done, we don't have tons of research to compare conventional and digital impressions, but there's a really good study that actually it's from Switzerland, where they actually compared a conventional impression that they made a digital denture and an intraoral scan that they then made a digital denture. And they were able to test how much retention it had by pulling on it in 3 different directions and then measuring that for, I think, 10 patients. It was only the maxilla. But what was interesting is they found 2 to 3 times more retention on the conventional impression that was used to make the digital denture over the intraoral scan. And that tells you there's this variation from one person to the next, not to mention that if you overstretch the tissue, if you think about it, you overstretch that tissue, it's now not where it should be at rest. You capture it there, a denture is made to fit that position, but yet the tissue really is inset from that. And so you get a more difficult to get that that retention and in the actual kind of suction that you look for sometimes in your dentures. So that's where I think you can find that struggle when you jump to the intraoral scanner.
And I would imagine, yeah, because I would imagine that could be frustrating for some
Yeah,
first-time users. And of course, we may have
absolutely.
some folks on the call here on the podcast that have, done scores of these and know very well what
Absolutely.
I'm talking about. But let's say you're a novice at this, or you're just starting and you're doing your impressions, because it always struck me as, okay, I understand the principle in digital scanning of,
Yeah.
that static relationship to get something that you can come off of. But when you have tissue, when maybe the patient needs to swallow or move or take a
Yeah.
break, or your assistant's pulling in one direction to retract
Yeah.
the tissue, and things are all moving around, and that's got to be frustrating
Yeah.
to try to capture that.
Yeah, and it always looks, and in in the lecture at the annual meeting, I'll go through and show that, show you videos of how to do it. And of course, it looks a lot easier when I show a video of it, because I'm not showing you the first one I ever did, because
Right.
out of being smart, I didn't record it, because no one wants to watch me struggle the first time. But that's the reality, is the first time you do anything, it's rough, and then you start to learn. But it is a lot easier. So I scan for dentures. When an immediate denture, I scan every patient, because you have a lot of flexibility there. So to me, the best way to start if you want to scan is have an immediate denture patient. They've got some remaining teeth. It makes it a lot easier to scan. Plus, an immediate denture, everything's going to change. So you have a lot of flexibility there, and you can do a reline or remake a denture is almost as your plan. So that's a great way to start. And it works really well, because one of those challenges is making an immediate denture impression with existing teeth is not an easy thing to do. And so scanning that, really intraorally scanning for an immediate denture is amazing. So that's a great place to start. And then as you build your confidence with that, then jump in and try some dentures, and you'll find it can work really well, but you will find some of those struggles. And primarily that's in the mandible, on those patients that are difficult denture patients to start with.
Yeah. So, and you made a great point as we started out, before I started asking the questions, that one of the ways to compensate for that, especially if you're just starting out with this, is to take the impression and go from there,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And digitize the impression.
exactly. And for most people, I think that's the best place to start, because the digital workflow will already be a little shock to your system of your normal workflow. So, do a traditional impression. You're used to doing that. Then scan it and start. That's where you can start your digital process. And therefore, it's not going to be as much of a leap of faith as maybe it would be if you tried to fully start by just intraorally scanning and do the whole digital denture that way. It's good to kind of take little steps so you find out what works well for you.
So, and I guess it's dependent on the scanner, and we'll try to talk about that in a few
Yeah,
minutes, about
sure.
what's the scanning choices and things like that. But
Yeah.
first visit out, you have your patient in, you're doing all of what we described. What are we looking at for someone that has a little bit of experience time wise?
Yeah, so I schedule for every denture. It's basically 3 appointments. Each appointment's 1 hour, and the reality is I don't even take the full hour sometimes. But you just you never know, so it's kind of hard to be 100% sure. So I traditionally schedule 1 hour, three appointments, and I've only had 2 times so far that I've had to have either a fourth appointment or even maybe more. I've had one patient that was very challenging, was kind of bipolar, so it made that kind of fun to do the aesthetic try, and you could never get an agreement because it would change mid appointment. And then I've had others where they wanted to change, the tooth molds, so those are the traditional, but most of the time it's 3 appointments. And so 1 hour each keeps it pretty straightforward.
Yeah, that's good stuff. So first appointment, we talked about. Second appointment, patient's
Yep.
coming back, and what's happening?
So at that point, we're going to do a try-in. So we basically will take and get some form of a try-in. There's 2 try-ins that I tend to do. One is an all-white try-in, where it's basically the whole denture is all white. It's printed. We try that in, and we go from there. Now, I do that type of a try-in if the patient's existing denture is relatively close to what I want the new denture to be. So I'm not making major changes in vertical dimension or changes in tooth positions. It's just very, very minor. Then I will do that. If I have a patient where we're making significant changes in vertical, we're moving teeth all over the place from where they currently are, then I do a different type of try-in, and that's called a Wagner try-in. It's a try-in where they have a printed denture base and a few teeth that are part of the base, but all the anterior teeth, there's 8 of the teeth they put in the anterior, are individually set in wax. And what that allows you to do is then basically have an aesthetic try-in that you're used to, where the teeth are in wax and I can physically move them. And that's really helpful, because if you open vertical, it's really hard to guess where the teeth should be. So you have to see that within the confines of the patient's mouth and then make those changes. So that's where I like to have the teeth in wax, so I can move things around, see that within the patient's smile and function and aesthetics and phonetics, and then go from there. So that's the second appointment, is that aesthetic try-in. And at that point, we get our final centric relation record at the vertical. And that's, again, all scanned. And then from there, we send it off, we send it back, and now they're going to do a digital preview. So that's probably one of the newer things from a digital denture perspective that you are not used to really as much in a traditional denture, is rather than have it in front of you that you can turn and look at, you're looking on a screen.
So when you have, so at that appointment, you know,
Yep.
I guess, so you're talking about printed denture base, wax, teeth and wax. If
Right.
everything's completely like, so you're checking two things, obviously, as would be evident, right? We're going to check the fit of the denture base as
Yep.
well as, you know, the records that we might normally do. If everything's completely out of whack, are you going to rescan, or are you going to move the teeth where you want them and then scan your wax up? Where are you going from there?
Exactly. Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll move the teeth on this try-in, and then once I get it to where I want it, then I'll scan that with the final actual centric relation record of everything. And so, yeah, you take that time in that appointment, move things. It doesn't mean you have to sit there and make all the, you know, festoon it, make it look beautiful. You're just trying to get the teeth where you want it to be, because that reference will be used by the lab to then position all the teeth for the final denture. So you basically try to get that as a good landmark. I get a photograph or something so that when I do my preview, that the lab, after they take that data and they design it, I can look at a picture, I can look at the design, and then make those changes.
That's great. And then, so patient comes back, so that's accomplished at the lab, goes out to the lab, whatever the case may be, and
Yep.
then patient's back for the insert.
Yep. For the final. And so in between that, the one part I mentioned was that digital try, or the digital preview. And that's nice because what I do is I get a preview that's sent to me, and it shows me exactly what the denture is going to look like on a screen. And then I can either request the lab to make changes, or I can actually click a button and go in and make the changes myself. So it gives you that flexibility of, oh, you know, this looks good, but I'd like to change this spot. You know, I can either type a note and say, do this, or I can physically go in and make those changes myself. And then they make the denture, and we go for our third appointment where we have the placement appointment.
So let me work backwards here with some
Yeah,
questions.
please.
So let's talk materials. So the
Yeah.
materials
Yeah.
that these final dentures are made out of, is it different than the conventional denture? The same? Talk to me about that.
Yeah. So what I do, and I still am doing most of my dentures milled. So they're CAD/CAM milled as opposed to printed. And the only reason for that is that when I look at the material options that I have currently from the printed side, I don't have as much basically long-term data to know how it's going to perform long enough. And we have new materials coming out all the time. So I still do mine CAD/CAM milled, and that's also using same acrylic resin, polymethyl methacrylate that we're used to, acrylic resin that we've been using for traditional dentures. So what that means is all of our materials, soft liners, if we need to do a hard reline, all of those things work with that material. And I can use it for complete dentures. I can use it for over dentures. I can use it for fixed complete dentures like hybrids if I'm doing a metal acrylic type. And so it allows me to use the same material across all of my basically full arch type of restorations. Whereas printing right now, there's only really one printed material that they say can be indicated for an overdenture because of the higher impact and forces that are applied. So we're definitely making a transition to doing a lot more printing than milling. But right now, for me, because of the types of restorations I do, the milled allows me to have a material that we know how to work with, and we know how it's going to perform for a long time.
Yeah, so that's good. That's great stuff. So, let's talk a little bit about milling. So I know are you milling? You're not milling the final, but I'm going to ask you some maybe
Yeah,
some
please.
obvious questions. But
Yeah.
so you can do a final in your office. Some people can mill in the office
Yeah,
for a
or
final.
if you print, yeah, you could print in your office. Yeah,
print.
so I don't, not too many people will mill in their office unless they have a lab associated with their
Right.
office. But yeah, so I print all the try-ins, and I do print some dentures. And so but it's more, it's a great opportunity to do it because I use a printer all the time for so many things in my office that this is just one more thing that you can do with it. You do have to have a little experience of how to bond them together and finish, polish, but it's amazing to think that you can basically go through and actually fabricate a denture in your office pretty easily. And that's the beauty of what we can do with printing. And that's why printing is becoming so much more popular, because milling is not feasible to do in your office. So printing allows you to do this. Yeah.
And I would imagine, printing something like this in your office is great for an interim.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. And that's one of the beauties of it, because it's not going to be something that's going to need to be there forever. And so you can definitely do that very quickly. You can also make changes to it very easily. Probably the only limiting factor is just getting that design, right? That's the only part that's probably the tricky, because most of us aren't going to design it ourselves, but we get the file, we print it. And yeah, it's a great way to do it. So it's just making sure that you have the right material and the experience on how to bond things together and finish and polish. So
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about scanners now. And I don't want to go into any specific
yeah, absolutely.
types of scanners, but there's a lot of different scanners out there. Obviously, some are better than others.
Yep.
What would be the sort of the minimum, or can all scanners in the market nowadays give you the image necessary for this, or are there some better than others? Or
Yeah, I think nowadays most of them can do this. I haven't personally tried to use every type, so I've used probably 3 or 4 of them, and they work pretty well. So I haven't had a major problem with that. So I would assume the majority of the modern day scanners will be able to do that, but it is hard to know. And the other thing I've found is when I scan with one scanner and then I go to another scanner, especially if it's the first time I've used that scanner, yeah, there is a learning curve again, because it's either you have to learn like what speed you can move, because the path in which, or the pattern in which you scan is basically the same, but learning how fast you can move and the different things, that probably is the part that there's still a learning curve. So I think they all can work. It's just really going to be, got to practice a little bit before you're ready for prime time on that.
oh, no question about that. And just like anything else, especially with for Crown and Bridge, it's
Yeah.
garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah,
It's the,
yeah,
the
100%.
quality of the scan, and many times more so than the actual scanner itself.
Correct. And that's so true. So true.
What about software? Now, do these, let's say I go out, I don't know a lot about
Yeah.
digital dentures, and I go out and buy a scanner. I don't have a scanner. Am I going to
Yeah.
get the software necessary for this, or this is something like I got to buy an exocad or whatever? How's
Yeah.
this work?
Yeah, so this is where you're likely, unless you really are into digital designing yourself, you're really going to want to link up with your lab, or select a lab that can do this, because you'll get a scanner, you can digitize something, get that file like an STL file, or one of those files that the lab can use to do everything. And that's probably as far as most people are going to go. At that point, they'll send that to the laboratory, and then the laboratory has a couple options. They can use 3Shape, they can use exocad. Those are the 2 big lab design softwares. Or there's companies that specifically do digital dentures, and so they take that, they have their own proprietary software that's designed specifically for dentures, and they make a denture. So that's really just a matter of deciding which avenue you want to go. If that's your local lab, whether that's a lab that focuses only on digital dentures, and therefore they have their own software. So they take your files, they do all the heavy lifting, and then they send you a preview of that. And so that's really just depends on what works for you. What's interesting is, when you look at, and I don't know how it is in your area specifically, or where all of the viewers, but in my area, the amount or the number of removable technicians that are in business is it's declining, getting smaller and smaller. And it's really sad, because the knowledge that they have is amazing, and what they know is unfortunately not being passed to the next generation like it has been for their generation. Like when they started this, they probably learned that from somebody else. Unfortunately, that knowledge is not being passed on to, because a lot of the ones in my area, when they're ready to retire, it's not that they're selling their laboratory, they're just closing the doors. And it's, that's really kind of sad. So what's happening is a lot of laboratories that are used to doing, fixed crowns and things like that, are now, because of these software programs, are now taking on those type of cases, but yet they don't necessarily have the experience in removable. They're good at fixed, but now you talk about a denture setup, they can struggle because they have the software that can do it, and they know how to move teeth, and they're really good at that, but they don't understand those principles of removable pros that these traditional lab technicians have learned over decades of experience. And so that's one of those challenges you run into. So one thing you'll find is you may have a great lab you like to work with that does really good fixed, and then you send them something removable, and it may be a struggle that first few times. So that's where you may have to find a laboratory that has experience in removable, because not every lab's going to be great at doing dentures.
You know, that is so true. I mean, some of these guys are just so good. And
Oh,
I mean,
oh,
I teach at NYU. I taught at
yeah.
NYU, and we had some in-house guys that were just,
Yeah.
you know, unbelievable.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
and they each have their own niche. I mean, some were really great at fix, and we all know this, of course, but I'm going to repeat the obvious that, you know, and some of these guys just could do things that were like, wow.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, so really good stuff. So I'm sure when you know your course in Montreal that again July 9th through 12th, the AGD 2025 in Montreal. I know you're giving some great stuff, and I'm sure you'll go over this in a little bit more detail about, you know, how to
Absolutely.
work with the lab and send
Yeah.
the cases and all that. We don't have time for that now, so
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that. That's for sure.
Yeah.
100%. What about, and let me circle back, materials again. The
Yep.
materials, same strength, any in weakness? Some people
Yeah.
might be a little worried about
Yeah.
that.
So traditionally, what we find, and in the lecture that I'll be doing, we'll go a lot deeper into this, actually comparing conventional milled and printed denture materials, so you can actually really see these differences. Milled dentures are more dense because of how they're processed. So they're processed under significantly more pressure and temperature than a traditional denture. So they have more flexural strength and all these different things we look at, but they will be, maybe sometimes they can, and then they can be more brittle sometimes because they're more dense. Right? Anything that's more dense could be, you know, obviously be more brittle. So sometimes that's what we see. What we tend to find, and this is what's tricky, is in the printing world of these materials that are available, there's different generations of materials. The first generation of these printed materials really weren't amazing, you know, in terms of strength, fracture resistance, as well as staining and other things. But now, as we get in these new generations of materials, they're all getting better and better. And that's, you know, that's the normal progression that we see in everything, right? The first generation sometimes needs a little modification. It gets better and better until you get to that, you know, kind of perfected material. So really, so far the milled is very comparable, if not better, to conventional dentures. Most of the time, it's a little bit better in all the material properties than a conventional denture. Printed so far is slightly below it, but it's catching up quicker and quicker with each new generation. So that's been kind of the fun thing to watch as these new materials come out. We really see that really improvement that gets it closer and closer to conventional and milled dentures.
Yeah, you know, that's great stuff. And you mentioned archiving. So I want to talk a little bit about archiving.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so all these are archived. Fantastic. You've got a record
Yeah,
of everything. So let's say
yeah,
you have a patient out there, you made him a denture and
yeah,
they broke the denture. You've got the
absolutely.
archive. Are you having them in for repair, or are you just going to make another denture for them and
Yeah,
have them come back
yeah.
out?
So I've had at least 3, maybe 4 examples where this has saved me. So probably the more interesting one was, I had one patient, I made a denture. It's probably 3 or 4 weeks after he got his new denture. He was out deep sea fishing and he got seasick, and you can imagine what happens. And he lost his dentures. We can imagine how that happened. So he gets back to the, you know, cell phone reception, wherever that was, and he called me up and just said, "Hey, I lost my denture." I called the lab up. They remade one, and I think, you know, I think it was like a Friday afternoon, as always is Friday afternoon when something happens. But by Monday or Tuesday the next week, I had a new denture. It had only been a few weeks, so I didn't even have to reline it. And so that's kind of the beauty of, I didn't have to have him come in for anything. When he came in, he had his new denture. So he had to go the weekend without the denture, but I had a brand new one by the time he got back. And in theory, this is where that was being milled. So if I would have printed it, I could have printed one and probably had him come in that afternoon and at least given him a temporary one that he could get by with. So, you know, again, these are the things that really opens up just a world of opportunity if that happens. And, you know, I see a lot of patients lose their denture, right? That's common. They drop it or break it. And, you know, so those are things that, it's not every day, but when it does happen, it's such an amazing thing to know. I've got this file that I can easily reproduce what I had the day I gave it to him.
Absolutely incredible. Yeah, that's really great stuff. And the patients, you know, half of these patients are thinking, "Oh my God, I went through this, you know,
Yeah,
conventionally. I've done this
yeah,
before. Conventionally,
yeah,
this took months for me to get this
yeah,
done."
yeah. And
And
then
they
you have to
lost their,
adapt and get used to it, you know, and you know, it's nice
yeah,
to,
and and then and they lose it and they're like, oh my God, I got to go through that again. You're like, oh no, we can do that. So that's really
Yeah,
good stuff.
100%.
So that's a good segue into my next question. So
Yep.
reline. So from a reline standpoint, if
Yep.
you've got your scan, the patient has been wearing the denture, they need a reline, they come back. Are you basically just doing a wash, scan, merge the files, or how are you doing that?
Yeah, so it really depends. So for me, if the patient has a milled denture, right? So this is one of the benefits to having still milling the denture is it's still acrylic resin. So I will do a traditional reline impression most commonly, unless the teeth are worn out. If I did a printed denture, then I would do a reline impression, scan the whole thing, merge the files, and make a new denture that I would physically print. So that's one of the differences I make. So if I mill it, it's a lot easier for me to just do a traditional reline because patient comes in the morning, they get it in the afternoon. If I do the other one, I still have to send it to redesign it because I'm not going to sit there and redesign it during the office hours. So there's a little difference there. Both work well. It's just kind of a workflow. And again, the thing that's nice with the printed side would be that the patient could wear that denture, even if it's a little loose, they can still take it with them. When I do a traditional hard reline, I do have to keep the denture and send it to the lab to have them do the hard reline. So, but the reason I do that is differences in materials. And so you can hard reline a printed denture, but it's only really mechanically locking into that material. It's not chemically bonding to it. So.
Yeah. So I guess the key here is options. It's always good to have
Yep.
options, right?
And that's what digital dentistry offers us, right? We can pick and choose how digital we want to go, when we want to jump into that digital part, when we want to jump out of it. So
That's it. I think we can all agree in dentistry we want, plan A, B, and C.
100%.
And D if D if there is one.
Yeah, and we don't want someone telling us you have to do only one way.
That's right. That's right. That's good stuff. So that's really good. A really good. I know we went through digital dentures really quickly,
Yeah.
and it's a big subject. And I know you're going to do an amazing job with the course. But we only have a couple of minutes. I just want to hit you with a couple of quick things because I know you're
Please.
doing another course on implant overdentures. So
Yes,
just
yes,
a couple of quick questions, and we're not really going to go into it in depth.
yeah,
But
sure.
let me ask you this: from a workflow standpoint. Let's just use a 2 implant mandibular
Yep.
overdenture. Are you making your denture first, or are you making it at the same time that you are fabricating in the case? Or are you going to have a denture made, then do your uncovering and then attach it, or are you going to make it at the same time?
Yeah, so it just depends. I have patients come in, they already have the implants, and then that's one way. If they come in and we're starting from scratch, they don't have any implants, and we're doing the denture, then what I traditionally do is I'll have them wear their existing denture while things are healing. And then once the implants are ready, then I make the new denture only because, and I don't have to do this, but it makes it easier if I know where those implants are, because then I actually can have the denture made with the recesses already cut inside of them. So I don't have to find them and then hollow it out. It's already done for me. But it all depends. You've got every scenario that can walk into your office where, they don't have a denture. So you got to make them something. And then you just, after the implants are ready, you would just hollow it out. But if I have the luxury of they have something they can function with, then I can have the denture made with the recesses. I can also do metal reinforcement inside of it. So if I need that extra strength, I can do that too.
Yeah, I don't think there's necessarily any right or way or wrong way. There's a lot of different ways. I mean, I know some that would say, let's make a well-fitting denture,
Yep.
and make sure and
Have room.
understand we need the proper support and then attach for retention and not necessarily.
Absolutely.
And some people don't understand that. So
Yeah, 100%.
yeah, good stuff. So real quick, couple other quick things. So, what about overdentures on the maxilla?
Yeah.
I've done a lot of these cases, and I'm always going for a bar. I mean, what are you thinking
Yeah.
about locators, let's say, on the maxilla?
Yeah. So I do quite a few of them. And what I find is if I go the route of the bar, which I personally like because it splints everything together, the challenge becomes the cost goes up substantially and complexity goes up. And so all of a sudden, when you look at the bar retained overdenture and you look at something fixed on implants, it gets pretty darn close. And so it becomes a little bit harder to convince patients to do a bar supported overdenture when you're really close to just doing something fixed. So that's, to me, I end up doing a bar supported overdenture in really only 2 examples. One is where they need to have something where the flange is quite out there to support their lip. And so they need that ability to have something they can remove so they can clean and put it back, or you have those patients to just, really need that access for cleaning. So it's one is facial support, the other is for access for cleaning. That are the two reasons why I do the bar supported overdentures. So most of the time nowadays when I'm doing this, they're not splinted together. There'll be 4 implants in the maxilla, for example, and then we just have the non-splinted like locator attachments in the denture. So, I like the idea of cross arch stabilizing, but the challenge becomes most of the patients when we compare a complete denture, an overdenture, and a fixed complete denture as these 3 options. When I talk about a bar supported overdenture, you are so close to the cost of a fixed option, they tend to go fixed over removable.
Yeah, absolutely. I just had, challenges even in guided surgery trying to
Sure.
parallel the 4 maxillary implants. I
Oh,
mean, I just don't think it's impossible. I mean,
100%.
it's nearly
Oh,
impossible.
yeah, no, it really is impossible to get all 4 unless you've got just ample bone everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. And then I always worry about, rotation on the fixture and so on and
Ab-
so forth.
Absolutely. Yep.
So last question. So then when you're doing your overdentures, do you have a material choice? Because you mentioned brittleness, and of course we have that. In some
Yep.
cases, it's sort of rocking
Yep.
on an attachment, one or the other. What
Yep.
are you in favor of?
Yeah, so that's where I do a milled acrylic resin denture with metal reinforcement. So I still put metal reinforce in there. Reason being, I went for a couple of years and I was like, you know what? Because these materials are stronger, I really don't need metal reinforcement. So I was like, okay, so I did that, and I saw more fractures than I saw when I didn't do that. So I went back, and in the milled dentures, they can embed a metal mesh inside of it and mill it, and so then you've got the best of both worlds. And so that's kind of been my go-to, and that's one of the reasons why, like, I don't do printed dentures for overdentures, because so far there's only one material that they really talk about that you could do that with, or that the company indicates it for that. All the other ones really are saying, no, don't do it for an overdenture, do it for just tissue supported, but don't do the over, because it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
You've hollowed it out, you've weakened it, and then you're having more forces the patient can apply because it's attached better. So makes sense.
Absolutely. What a wonderful discussion. Really, really was a pleasure to have you on the program and to chat a little bit about this. And I am really looking forward to seeing your course up in Montreal. So let me ask you this, Doc, and thanks again. If someone wanted to get a hold of you to speak, or even if they had a question, share your contact information with
Yeah,
them.
absolutely. No, I'm more than happy to do that. And again, thank you for having me on. It's been a great chat. Best one's email, actually, probably easiest to get a hold of me, and that's just Goodacre. So it's BGOODACRE at gmail.com is really one of the easiest ways. Or of course on Instagram and everything like that, you can get a hold of me as well. And that's just Goodacre is my line there. So, easy to get a hold of me, and just please reach out. Happy to help answer any questions or anything that comes up. And I'll look forward to seeing all of you in Montreal. And again, thanks for having me on the podcast.
Excellent. Thanks again. And I'd also like to thank our producer, Kristen Gover. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe to our channel. You can always find us on the AGD app, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, or suggestions, please contact us at news@agd.org. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.